Today is the 6th of June. You woke up before the sun, not because of noise, but because of emptiness. There he is, the man you married. His body is inches away, but his soul feels miles apart. You can hear him breathe. You can feel the mattress shift beneath his weight, but you can't remember the last time he looked at you. Not with warmth, not with hunger, not with love. It's a grief no one talks about. Because how do you explain the pain of being lonely while sharing the same bed? How do you describe that feeling of being invisible to the one you vowed forever to? You stare at the ceiling and quietly whisper the words no one hears. God, is this how love dies? But Archangel Michael hears you, and this morning he speaks into the hollow silence. This is not death. This is dormancy. And heaven wants to restore what was lost. Her name is Rachel, a 44-year-old Christian woman from Tallahassee, Florida, married for 18 years, mother of 3, faithful servant at her local church. To everyone else, they were the model couple, always present together, smiling in the pew, holding hands at the community potluck. But what no one saw was the growing silence between them. Her husband, Jacob, used to be so attentive. He'd leave sticky notes with Bible verses in her purse. He'd pray over her before meetings. He'd grab her hand in the parking lot like a teenager in love. But that version of him was gone. Not completely, but buried beneath routine, exhaustion, and unspoken hurt. He didn't leave, but he also didn't see her anymore. And here's what Michael wants every believer to understand. Sometimes the greatest distance isn't physical. It's spiritual disconnection. 2 bodies can share a room. 2 schedules can share a calendar. 2 names can share a tax return. But if the hearts no longer speak the same sacred language, marriage becomes an echo chamber instead of a covenant. Rachel began noticing the small things. He no longer asked how her day went. He came to bed later, left earlier. He stopped offering to pray over the kids. Stopped making eye contact at dinner. Stopped calling her babe or darlin'. At first, she told herself it was just a phase. Then months passed. Then years. And one day, she realized she had become a roommate with someone she once called her miracle. She tried everything. New clothes, counseling podcasts, date night reminders, even silence, hoping maybe he'd notice the change in her eyes. But Jacob just got quieter. He was tired. Work was stressful. The kids were demanding. That's what he said anyway. But what Rachel felt was simpler. He doesn't want me anymore. And that's the lie the enemy plants when spiritual disconnection creeps in. It doesn't start with sin. It starts with silence. One night, Rachel stayed up reading Psalm 126. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. And a thought whispered into her soul. You don't need to be loved like you were at the start. You need to be loved like you're still worthy now. Tears welled up because she hadn't felt worthy in years. Archangel Michael calls this stage the fog of familiarity. It's when love grows dull because no one fights to keep it sacred. And here is the first healing truth. Familiar doesn't mean faithless. And distance doesn't mean dead. Sometimes the marriage isn't over. It's just frozen, waiting for one of you to hear the call from heaven. Wake it up. Rachel sat up that night and whispered to God, I miss him, but more than that, I miss me. The version of me that felt seen. The version of me that laughed in the kitchen. The version of me that was pursued. And the answer that rose in her heart wasn't what she expected. Start there, restore her, and watch what wakes up around her. Because heaven's restoration doesn't begin in your partner. It begins in you. And today is the first step toward waking what's been sleeping too long. Rachel stood in the kitchen the next morning, clutching her coffee like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Across the table sat a photograph, her and Jacob on their wedding day. He was laughing. She was looking straight at him like he was the only man in the world. She remembered how tightly he held her hand during the ceremony, how he whispered, I'll never stop choosing you. But today, He hadn't looked at her in 3 mornings. Not really. She had become part of the background noise, like the clink of dishes, the hum of the fridge, the soft patter of kids' feet upstairs. Jacob wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He was just absent. And Rachel had become a ghost in her own house. Here's what Archangel Michael says happens next in the sacred restoration process. If the room feels empty, don't wait to be invited. Fill it with your light. This is the second step in healing what feels distant. Reignite sacred presence. But this doesn't mean faking joy or forcing intimacy. It means reclaiming your spiritual authority in your home. Because when love disconnects, most people try to fix it horizontally with behavior, with gifts, with talks. But Michael says, before you reach for them, reach upward. The power of love is always vertical first. Rachel decided to do something different. She didn't plan a speech. She didn't write another letter. She lit a candle. She placed it in the middle of the table where their family once did nightly prayers. And she whispered, Holy Spirit, fill this home again. Touch what I can't touch. Reach what I can't reach. Speak where I've been silenced. No thunder shook the room. But something shifted in her. She started rising a little earlier, not for chores, not to plan, but to simply sit, breathe, invite heaven in. Michael calls this sacred rhythm the return to radiance, because a woman who reconnects to God's presence in her own soul begins to shine again. And when a woman shines, the whole room notices 7 if no one speaks it. Rachel didn't tell Jacob what she was doing, but after 3 days, he paused at the door and asked, Did you change something in here? She looked up from her journal and said softly, Just the atmosphere. That's when she remembered what Michael had said. You don't have to chase their attention. You have to host God's presence. The heart always turns toward light. It's not manipulation. It's not pressure. It's spiritual realignment. Rachel began praying with the room, not just in it. She walked the house slowly after everyone was asleep, whispering peace into the corners, blessing the couch where they once laughed, laying a hand on his pillow and saying, Restore the man who first loved me, not for my comfort, but for his wholeness. This is your second action step. Restore the sacred before you request the romantic. Light a candle. Play worship softly in the background. Pray over your home, not just inside it. Declare peace over silence. Declare vision over detachment. And declare connection over apathy. Because heaven doesn't enter chaos with noise. It enters with invitation. And you, beloved, are the gatekeeper. Jacob didn't come home with flowers. He didn't write her a letter. But on the 5th morning, as she sat in the kitchen again, he poured her coffee. No words, no eye contact, but he poured. And her eyes welled up not because he remembered how she likes it, but because for the first time in weeks, he saw her. And sometimes, that's where it begins again, not with a grand gesture, but with the cup passed across the silence, and the faint stirring of something that once slept, beginning to wake. Rachel stared at the mug Jacob had poured for her. It was the first act of tenderness in months. Not a declaration, not an apology, just a small offering, a quiet flicker of the man she remembered. And for a moment, something fluttered inside her hope. Not the wild, foolish kind that dreams of perfect reconciliation overnight, but the sacred kind, the kind that whispers, maybe this isn't over. Archangel Michael teaches that when love becomes distant, many rush to force connection. They schedule sit-downs. Start awkward conversations. Try to explain what they need. And while communication matters, heaven's order is always this. Healing must begin in the unseen realm before it bears fruit in the physical. Michael calls this third principle the law of loving intercession. You can't fight a spiritual silence with earthly noise. You must war with love in the invisible. And Rachel, without fully realizing it, had begun to do just that. She stopped nagging. She started nurturing, not him, but herself, her spirit, her inner woman. Every evening she wrote letters, not ones she planned to send, but prayers disguised as conversations. Dear Jacob, I miss the way you used to look at me. But more than that, I miss the softness in your eyes. The man who saw me not as obligation, but as gift. I forgive you for not seeing me lately. And I release the version of me that tried to earn your gaze. God, return us to Eden, to the garden before the shame, to the nakedness before the fear. She folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box. Each night, another letter. Another page soaked in quiet longing and radical surrender. Because Rachel was no longer fighting for attention. She was interceding for restoration. This is what Michael wants you to understand. There is power in written prayer. When your words feel too tender to speak out loud, heaven still reads your ink. Your journal can become your altar. Your pen can become your weapon. And your tears can become your offering. Rachel didn't see immediate changes. But Jacob began pausing more, looking longer, asking small questions like, "Did you sleep okay? Did you eat today?" These weren't just words. They were doorway-small cracks in a wall that had long felt impenetrable. And she didn't rush through them. She didn't demand more. She just smiled, said, "Thank you," and let grace fill the space between them. This is your third action step. Write what you cannot say. Not to accuse, not to beg, but to bless. Bless the man or woman who seems far away. Bless their heart to soften. Bless their soul to awaken. Bless their ears to hear the whispers of heaven again. And bless your own soul to release expectation, so love can return on holy timing, not human pressure. One evening, Jacob passed by Rachel as she was writing at the dining table. He stopped. "Are you working?" he asked, glancing at her notebook. She looked up and smiled. "Just writing." And for the first time in what felt like forever, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat. He didn't ask to read it. He didn't pry. He just sat and breathed and stayed. Rachel didn't say a word. She just kept writing, heart thudding in her chest, knowing that the space between them had begun to fill, not with old romance, but with presence. And presence is the first sign of return. Because people drift when they feel unseen, but they begin to come back when they feel safe. And Rachel, through prayer and patience, had started to make safety sacred again. Jacob continued to sit with Rachel in the evenings. No deep talks, no dramatic breakthroughs, just presence. The kind that once felt impossible. He would sip his tea, she would journal. Sometimes the radio played softly in the background old gospel hymns they both knew by heart. Rachel didn't expect miracles, but in those quiet moments, she noticed something far more sacred than a grand gesture. She no longer felt invisible. Archangel Michael describes this part of the restoration as the holy resurfacing. It's when love begins to float back to the surface, not because it's forced, but because safety has softened the soil. Michael says, "Love cannot rise where fear lives, and affection cannot grow in the shadow of expectation. It returns when peace becomes the atmosphere again." Rachel remembered something her grandmother once told her. Love is not always fire. Sometimes it's the gentle turning of a face back toward yours. And that's exactly what had begun. Jacob wasn't rushing to fix things, but he had stopped pulling away. They were no longer islands. They were becoming a quiet shoreline. One afternoon, as Rachel folded laundry, she found an old hoodie of Jacob's from their early marriage years. She smiled. It still smelled faintly of his cologne. And for a moment, she remembered the early days, the spontaneous road trips, the late-night devotions, the inside jokes that made their kids roll their eyes. She didn't want to go back. She wanted to invite that spirit into the now. So she left the hoodie on his pillow. No note, no explanation, just a small act of remembrance. And that evening, she saw it folded gently on his side of the bed, not tucked away, not ignored. A thank you without words. Michael's next restoration principle is this: if you want love to return, sow memory into the present. Not manipulation, not forced nostalgia, but small, sacred replantings of what was once beautiful. Photos, songs, meals they used to share. Stories from Remember When? These are not tools of denial. They are seeds of hope. Rachel started playing their old playlist during dinner prep. She wore the perfume he used to love. She made his favorite dessert one Friday evening. She didn't do it for him. She did it for the spirit of connection to stir what had gone quiet. Jacob noticed. "Did you use that lotion again?" he asked one night, smiling faintly. "I did," she replied, heart pounding. Here's what Michael urges. Awakening love does not require explaining love. It only requires inviting it to breathe again. So this is your fourth action step. Replant beauty, one small seed at a time. Not to control the outcome, but to remind the soil that it once bloomed. Bring light to the atmosphere. Let laughter return without waiting for it to feel perfect. Let the home remember its former joy so the heart does too. Rachel knew they were still far from where they used to be, but something had changed. The emotional drought had broken, not with storms, but with dew. And dew, she remembered, doesn't fall loudly. It gathers slowly, quietly, faithfully. One night, as they sat outside watching the fireflies, Jacob said, "You're different lately, not in a bad way, just lighter." Rachel didn't pretend not to know why. She simply said, "I think God's been helping me remember who I was." Jacob nodded, looked away for a moment, then back at her. "I'm trying to remember too." And that was enough, because heaven never asked them to rebuild the whole house in one night, only to find the doorway again. Rachel lay beside Jacob again. The same room, the same bed, the same man. But everything had changed. He still didn't say much, still didn't reach for her like he used to. But last night, as she turned away to face the wall, he whispered, "I'm glad you're still here." And that was the first intimate sentence he'd spoken in nearly 6 months. Rachel didn't reply. She just exhaled softly, as if 1,000 unsaid prayers were finally heard. This is what Archangel Michael calls the final phase of sacred restoration, the slow return of gaze. Not gaze as in physical eyes, but the gaze of the soul, that holy, reverent awareness that says, "I see you again." Michael teaches, marriages do not fail because love vanishes. They fail because honor disappears, and restoration begins the moment honor returns. Rachel had stopped needing Jacob to be perfect. She no longer carried bitterness in her chest, no longer needed constant proof, no longer held him hostage to her past disappointments. And in letting go of the demand for closeness, she unknowingly made space for closeness to return. That's what heaven wanted all along. Not for her to manipulate healing, but to host it. One Sunday morning, they walked into church together. Not holding hands, not pretending, just walking side by side. During worship, she lifted her hands, not for Jacob, but for herself, to thank God for the process, for the loneliness that broke her pride, for the silence that made her still, for the space that taught her how to pray, for the slow return of something sacred. And halfway through the final song, Jacob's hand reached for hers. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just held it, like someone who had learned. Love, when restored by heaven, doesn't roar. It remembers. It releases. And it returns. Rachel would later write in her journal, "He didn't have to change everything. I just needed him to remember who we were when God was in the middle. And now, he is again." That entry marked the final bloom of their spiritual winter. Not because they were back to normal, but because something new had begun, a love with roots deeper than excitement, deeper than romance, a covenant awakened. So, here's the final action step for you. Hold space, not control. Your partner may not return tomorrow. They may not say what you hope to hear. They may not change how you imagine. But if you fill your home with peace, if you write without bitterness, if you worship without needing results, if you speak life and beauty in small, unshakable ways, heaven will honor your offering. Because God doesn't heal relationships through logic. He heals through presence. And where presence grows, intimacy follows. That night, Rachel and Jacob lay in bed closer than before. He turned slightly, his voice barely audible. "I miss this," Rachel whispered. "Me too." No fireworks, no violin music, just breath and peace and a sacred knowing. Heaven had restored what was lost, not all at once, but one small, holy moment at a time.